All right, let's talk about Albert Camus. He was a philosopher who really wasn't afraid to look into the abyss, to stare into that void. And he actually came back with a pretty incredible guide for how to live.
You know that feeling, right? You wake up one morning, you're going through the motions, and suddenly it just hits you. What is the point of all this? If you've ever felt that sudden disconnect where your daily routine just feels, well, weird, then you've already had a little taste of Camus' core idea.
And that big idea? He called it the absurd. This is the absolute starting point for everything else in his philosophy. Camus says this feeling can sneak up on you at the most random times. You could be driving to work, making coffee, and boom, the whole thing just feels like a strange play you're acting in. You look at it all and just think, why? Why am I doing any of this? That feeling, that uncomfortable moment of clarity, that's what he calls the beginning of absurd awareness.
So what exactly is the absurd? This is where it gets really interesting. For Camus, it's not that the world itself is absurd or that we are. No, the absurd is a relationship. It's a clash, a total mismatch between two things.
So on one side, you've got us, humanity. We are meaning-seeking creatures. We're constantly shouting these huge questions out into the cosmos. Why are we here? What's our purpose? And on the other side, you just get silence, crickets, nothing. The universe just doesn't answer back.
And this quote just nails it. The absurd is born right there, in that gap. For Camus, this isn't some puzzle you can solve. It's the basic, fundamental condition of being human. So the big question becomes, what on earth do you do about it?
And this leads us to a major fork in the road. Once you truly see and feel this absurd reality, you have to make a choice about how you're going to live with it.
Camus lays it out pretty clearly. He says there are really only 3 ways to respond.
So option 1 is physical suicide, just checking out. Option 2 is what he calls philosophical suicide, which is basically escaping into a belief system that gives you all the answers. And option 3, his answer, is to revolt. Let's look at why he says no to the first 2.
He rejects both of these, and pretty forcefully. Physical suicide, to him, is like admitting defeat. You're destroying the one thing, your own life, your consciousness, that can even recognize the absurd in the first place. But he's actually even tougher on philosophical suicide. This is taking a leap of faith into religion or some rigid ideology. To Camus, that's not a solution. It's just an escape. It's intellectually dishonest because you're pretending the absurd isn't there.
And that leaves us with the third option, the only one he thinks is authentic and honest: rebellion.
Now, rebellion doesn't mean fighting the universe with your fists. It's about looking that cold, silent universe right in the face, acknowledging the absurdity of it all, and choosing to live with passion anyway. It's living in spite of it all.
So where does this rebellion start? It starts with lucidity, with being brutally, unflinchingly honest. You have to accept it. There is no grand cosmic plan for you. We're here for a short time in a vast, indifferent universe. You have to see that clearly and not look away.
And right there, from that clear-eyed honesty, comes the most powerful part: choice. Knowing all of this, the rebel chooses to live as fully and passionately as possible. You throw yourself into life, not because it has some ultimate meaning, but precisely because it doesn't. This is it. This life is all you've got.
And the result of all this is a kind of radical freedom. The moment you stop looking for meaning out there somewhere, you are finally free to create it for yourself, right here. In your work, your passions, your relationships, you become the source of your own value.
Okay, but this isn't just some selfish, individualistic thing. For Camus, this personal rebellion actually ripples outward and has huge social implications.
This is one of his most famous lines, and it's so powerful. What he's saying is that when I stand up and rebel against something that is unjust to me, I'm not actually just fighting for myself. Think about it. The second I say, no, this is wrong, I'm also saying yes to some value, like human dignity. And I realize that the dignity I'm demanding for myself, I have to demand for everyone else too. My personal fight suddenly becomes the foundation for solidarity with all of humanity.
But Camus draws a super important line here. He's all for rebellion, which is human scale and recognizes limits. What he warns against is capital R revolution. That's the kind that seeks a perfect utopia and often ends up justifying horrible violence to get there. Rebellion tries to make things better. Revolution risks becoming a new form of tyranny.
So how in the world do you find happiness in this constant state of struggle and rebellion? Well, this brings us to his most powerful and famous metaphor.
You remember the myth of Sisyphus, right? The guy was cursed by the gods to push a giant boulder up a mountain, only to watch it roll back down again for all eternity? It sounds like the worst punishment imaginable. But for Camus, Sisyphus is actually a hero.
This is such a wild thought. Why would Sisyphus be happy? Camus says it's because in that moment when he's walking back down the hill, totally aware of his pointless task, and he chooses to go push that rock again, in that moment he is the master of his fate. He owns his struggle. He finds his meaning not in getting to the top, but in the act of pushing itself.
And that really brings it back to us. We all have our boulders, don't we? The daily grind, the challenges that keep coming back. Camus's point isn't that we'll ever get the boulder to stay at the top. The point is that we can choose to push it with passion and purpose.
And in the end, that's the message. It's incredibly life-affirming. In a world that offers no built-in meaning, the very act of living, of loving, of rebelling against absurdity, of struggling with purpose, that is everything. The struggle itself is enough to fill our hearts.